Hello and welcome to Fit This Week. I'm Eugene Obah. So glad to have you with us. It's Election Day Eve here in the United States, and the populace have already voted in their millions. As we mercifully approach the end of this election cycle, I speak to political commentator WayneTronics about how we got here, why we got here, and where things could go. We have quite a bit to get to, so let's get right to our interview. And joining me now is political commentator WayneTronics. Wayne, welcome to the show. It is great to have you on the program. And let's go ahead and get started. And we are now on the eve of this presidential election day in the United States. And we have gone through quite a road to get to this point here. And by tomorrow, we'll have a sense, at least a sense, of where the country is going. We're not going to have the final result. More likely than not, we're not going to have the final result, but at least we'll have some sense of what's going on. And one of the shifts in thinking about how we got here is that you have now the transition from President Biden to Kamala Harris as the candidate on the Democratic side. And of course, we've had Trump, who vanquished all of his opponents in the Republican nomination. Thinking about those changes, take a temperature check for me. Where do you think this is going to end up going, especially for tomorrow and possibly for this week? What are you seeing here?
Awesome. First off, thank you so much for having me on. Second, and most important, I think we're about to witness chaos, right? Because Kamala has run a very strong campaign during the time frame, but the far right doesn't care about strong campaigns. What they're looking for is chaos. He's already insinuated that there's votes being stolen in Bucks County, right? And things like that. So they're already gearing up for another contentious fight. I think in states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, with some of their early vote counting rules, we might not have an answer until the earliest Friday, right? And if you give them 3-4 days of frothing at the mouth on far right media and Fox News and all those other different things, we're in the same situation we were in 2020, right? And the question is, as a nation, are we emotionally prepared to go through that again? And I'm not entirely sure if that's something that we're really geared up to deal with after what happened in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, it's interesting with 2020 and 2021, we've had a lot of the mail-in ballots because of COVID. And there's been mixed messaging, certainly, particularly from the Trump campaign as to whether or not, mail-in is good, mail-in is bad, that sort of thing. And then the other thinking as well is that, to your point about the sort of priming the pump for a potential loss for Trump, we don't know, of course, what's going to happen, but let's just say for argument's sake, Trump loses, then the seeds have been planted at the very least. We're starting to see some of the chicanery, some of the burning of boxes, of the drop boxes out on the West Coast, that sort of thing. So with that, I'm like, and especially thinking about the lawsuits as well, already there has been over 138 lawsuits and all that have been filed, and I'm sure that there's more to come. So as far as the chaos goes, I don't know, where do we kind of sort of go from here? How do we stop the chaos that may happen throughout this week, some of the chicanery that may occur throughout this time?
I don't know if it's possible. And here's why I say that. Merrick Garland has been a very feckless AG, and the far right knows this, right? So they are factoring into their conclusions being able to cause chaos because they know he's not going to push back, right? If I remember right, the Pennsylvania AG tried to run up a lawsuit with Elon Musk and $1 million sweepstakes, and the feds pushed it back to the states, right? So we have a situation where they are planning upon things being as chaotic as possible, And Trump keeps hinting at a secret plan with Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House Johnson, right? So it seems as if what they hope for is a super close election, get it kicked back to the House, let it get passed. I think the cutoff date is December 11th, like with the
Something
electors,
like
if I
that.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're aiming for this complete and total chaos. But I think another thing that we keep underestimating is too is General Mike Flynn. He was supposed to be in the Trump administration. He didn't get the security clearance. He ended up having to be fired. It was a whole mess. But for the last 3, 4 years, he and a bunch of other guys like Eric Prince and so on and so forth have been laying the groundwork for January 6th 2.0, right? So what I get very concerned about is domestic terror attacks with uh, power outages and other different things to disrupt the situation. So law enforcement is focused on that when they are planning something more nefarious on the other side. And honestly, Eugene, 10 years ago, I would have sounded like a crazy person talking like this, that these are things that we can even say out in the open. But things have gotten to a point where this is a realistic possibility that we're looking at. Like they are honestly planning to sow so much chaos. Like Steve Bannon, who just got home from jail on Tuesday, I believe, he likes to
Mhm.
call it flooding the zone with shit, right? So, and they've done a masterful job at that to the point that the mainstream media has had a hard time adapting, and the average mainstream media viewer can't tell up and down anymore because there's so many different small fires all happening at once.
Exactly, and I want to get to the mainstream media. Do you think that they have done an effective job in this election cycle? And thinking about, say, future elections, especially midterms, that sort of thing, what would you like to see from our media going forward here?
The Overton window has switched, right? So we're at a situation where 10 years ago, there was a congressman from Iowa named Steve King, and he ended up losing his committee placements, and I think he ended up losing the next election in 16 because he said that white America can't keep having other people's babies. And that was a line too far for the Republican Party at the time. And the media at the time covered it properly, right? In 2024, you had a Nazi rally on Sunday at MSG, or the previous Sunday at MSG. And the media, they sane watched a lot of it, right? And I think a lot of the problem is, let's use CNN as an example. CNN is now owned by Warner Brothers Discovery. President and CEO is David Zaslav, who is an avowed Christian nationalist, white supremacist, all of these things, right? So there is no incentive for whether it be the Washington Post with the Bezos situation, whether it's the situation with Fox News and the Dominion voting and the Lodge and all these other different things. They have factored in that their profits and the potential benefits of a Trump administration is more important to them than journalistic integrity, right? So let's take a guy like Jake Tapper, lead anchor at CNN, has been a credible guy. I believe he's out of Philadelphia, got to start working for the Philadelphia Inquirer. That whole thing espouses everything about journalistic virtues, right? It's just been up until recently with his last interview with J.D. Vance, where you could say that he actually was putting pressure on the Republican candidate the same way Hunter Biden's laptop, Kamala Harris, McDonald's resume, whatever, these things that they get focused on. So what I would like to see more of is Edward R. Murrow, Walter Cronkite, Peter Jennings, Dan Rather, these things of previous generations where we could trust our news anchors and our reporters, whatever their political leanings were, to be fair and responsible to the audience.
That's very important, and that's something that we try and model here on this program. And you are right that this whole stuff with journalism, especially here in the U.S., uh, it's become, very siloed, whether it's, right leaning, left leaning, whatever the case may be. Um, we're not seeing a lot of good faith in some of these platforms. And,
Mm.
what was interesting about the Madison Square Garden rally last week. One thing I just
Mm,
have to say as a bit of an aside is that I just kind of sort of loved how like Dr. Phil, he was on there. He was talking about, oh, the country is not built on DEI, diversity,
mm,
equity, and inclusion. When
mm,
last time I checked, we would hear nothing from Dr. Phil but for a black woman, Oprah,
mhm,
giving him that opportunity,
mm,
to be on her show, and then he had his daytime talk show. So, I mean, I found that kind of sort of a little bit of a lack of self-awareness on that one. One of the things that you and I have actually even talked about on
mm,
Twitter is that there seems to have been a bit of a lack of empathy that
mhm,
has permeated across this country. Certainly, we think about the novel coronavirus pandemic.
mm,
We think about a lot of other issues. Um, and I just think that over the past few years, there's just been kind of sort of I don't know how you feel about this, but there's been kind of sort of a debasement of
mhm,
society at large. So when I think about that, could that influence how people vote in
mhm.
this election? I mean, what do you see here?
Well, as someone who suffers from long COVID, right? I got COVID in September of 2020. By the end of 2021, I had to be rushed to the hospital with congestive heart failure from COVID, right? It's been such an adverse effect on my life since it's happened. And I've noticed there's a lot of people who want to pretend this isn't happening, right? And it bleeds over. The Venn diagram of the people who were angry about the mask mandates and angry about the vaccine mandate to the same kind of people who are borderline sociopathic when it comes to their wants and needs. I need to be able to go to Olive Garden during the pandemic. I don't care if people die. And I think it does speak to a larger body politic in this country, right? Because we have rewarded selfishness. Trump is the embodiment of malignant, narcissistic, sociopathic. I want what I want. It's bad when it happens to me. It's good when it happens to you, kind of thing. And it's just one of those kind of situations where Trump has the sleeping giant of bigotry and racism and just all of these negative traits that people hold on to. Trump has allowed it to come out and manifest. And like we were saying earlier in the conversation, 10 years ago, it was unthinkable, some of the things that we talk about now. And now it's been normalized. And like, think about it like this. Trump and the Republicans talk about pro-life and law and order and all those other things, right? Since 1980, there's been more deaths from COVID in 4+ years than all of the homicides that occurred in the country during that time period. But they would try to scare you with migrant invasion and crime wave and all these other different things. But when it was time to have empathy for human life during the pandemic, they were the main ones saying, open up the schools, open up the stores. If grandma has to die to save the economy, so be it. We're 10 years plus during the Obamacare situation, it was death panels. Remember? They were going to put grandma to a death panel. And then when
Mhm.
COVID came up, they put grandma to a death panel. So I think the larger lack of empathy what the MAGA movement has encouraged, I think in this country specifically, it's made it okay to be a sociopath. It's made it okay to like people talk about road rage incidents seem to be up because everybody wants what they want when they want it. And when you have a head of a political party and movement and former president as selfish as Trump is, it's impossible for it not to bleed over into the larger body politic.
Yeah, and then what does it say about those Republicans who are not really, MAGA, like people like, say, former
Mm,
Governor Larry Hogan, for
hmm
example, in the state of Maryland, who's running
mm,
against Angela Brooks for the Senate seat. You think
mm,
about Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney,
mm.
some of the others. Where does that leave them? Is it time to create another political party? And to try and break off of this uh MAGA movement, which I think some people would say has the designs of a cult.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think the problem with creating another political party is Stuart Stevens has this book called "It Was All a Lie," right? About the ideology of Reaganite Republicans and Milton Friedman, trickle down economics, all of these values that they espoused for years, and you see that most of them have stayed within the cult, regardless of how much it's gone against the morals, values, integrity, so on that they speak of. So whether it's Liz Cheney, former congressmen like Joe Walsh, people like Rick Wilson and the Lincoln Project, they're dramatically in the minority, right? The Republican Party, as we knew it, has moved so far to the right that John McCain would be a resistance liberal if he was still alive today, right? So there's just not the numbers there for that. They have decided that white supremacy, great replacement theory, all of these things are more important than being a good person. So I think the only active solution to this is beating them at the ballot box and then having law enforcement and the new attorney general actually do their job to snuff out these domestic terrorist movements and show them that there's consequences for their actions.
And I think that talking of consequences of, for people's actions, I think in observing a lot of what has been going on throughout the past close to a decade, quite frankly,
Mm-hmm.
um, people do not know what it's like to be punched in the mouth. And now
Mm-hmm.
I'm not advocating, obviously, for actually people physically punching somebody in the mouth. I'm not advocating that whatsoever. But seems to me that we have, as a society, have kind of sort of been like almost like anything goes.
Mm-hmm.
You look at what's happening on X, formerly
Mm-hmm.
Twitter, that, when I was a student, when I was a college student, that was emerging as a good tool, for news
Mm-hmm.
gathering. And now with Elon Musk um, owning the platform, it has become a fire hose
Mm-hmm.
of nonsense. I mean, what do you say about Elon Musk's influence on all this? I know we touched earlier on the whole $1 million, stuff over
Mm-hmm.
here, giveaways, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
what about Elon's role in all of this? Has he kind of sort of become kind of sort of like, for lack of a better term, the George Soros of the
Mm-hmm.
Republican Party?
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy. I mean, the PayPal mafia, uh, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, David Sachs. These guys are determined to destroy Western democracy. Elon Musk is being used as the face of it, right? But Peter Thiel, in particular, has been very public about what his aims and desires are. And they would love nothing more than to see an apartheid state in America, right? It's obvious that's what they're pushing for, right? And, we give them the benefit of the doubt because of cult personality, because skin color, because of a bunch of other different things, right? But I believe if there was a Nigerian uh, brother who was black, who was comporting himself in the same fashion that one Elon Musk or Peter Thiel or David Sachs does, they'd probably be in jail already, right? And so when Musk bought Twitter, like I remember, tweeting about him, like he's only doing this because A, he wants to control the narrative around the election, but B, people forget we DM with each other all the time. God knows what information he got access to in people's DMs when he bought Twitter and what kind of blackmail that could be used for, right? Because when you first got Twitter, you never thought that these DMs that you're sharing with, say if you and I had a DM conversation like 10 years ago, right? We never thought that the next generation of apartheid would potentially have their hands on it. So it's obvious, especially recently with the conversation coming out that he's been in cahoots with Putin. It's obvious what they're aiming for, right? Like they're literally trying to help Russia bring America to its knees, and the payoff would be the same thing that happened to Russia in the early 90s. You would be able to sell America off for parts, the same way they did to the oligarchs over there. That is what the end game is. I think it's hard for the average person to wrap their mind around that, but Elon is clearly a fascist, and he's in league with other fascists. And until that's dealt with, when the richest man in the world, similar to Henry Ford and what is it, the Dearborn Spectator, right? It was a similar thing. A very wealthy man owning a newspaper, in this case, owning a social network to spread propaganda, baseless rumors, to sway elections. And none of these things are aimed for the betterment of the average person. It is literally for this new 21st century fascist elite club that they're trying to put together. And if Trump wins tomorrow, they're going to get their wish. Because Project 2025 is one of the most dangerous things I've seen in a long time, and Elon Musk is right in the middle of all of it.
And if he gets into, let's say, the cabinet,
Mm-hmm.
him and you think about RFK,
Mm-hmm.
who will want to get rid of vaccines and
Mm-hmm.
all if he's put in charge of HHS.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that could spell a lot of you know maybe not so good stuff right there, couldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about it. 100 years ago, the average life expectancy was, I want to say, about 52 years, right, for a woman, and I want to say it was like 48 years for a man. In 2024, the average woman is living in toward late 70s, and the average man is living towards early 70s. A lot of that has been the medical advancements that have occurred and scientific advancements over the last 100 years. Guys like RFK Jr. want to roll all of these things back, but it has been known that the GRU in Russia, Putin has been spreading anti-vaccine propaganda in America for decades. And one of the things that the aim has to be is to destroy us from the inside out. And during a pandemic, you got to figure how many people died because of these conspiracy theories, right? How many people don't have parents right now or don't have whomever because they bought into the anti-vaccine, anti-mask, whatever conspiracy theory. Now it's past experimental mRNA. Now RFK Jr. is saying the polio vaccine didn't work, right? So measles, mumps, the return of all these treatable things. If this is the path that we're headed down, 50 years from now, we might actually be in a situation where life expectancy is only 45 years, right? Because once you add in climate change, you add in all the other different things that's happening, and these listeria outbreaks at these plants because of lax regulations. That's the world that they want. Profit over everything, human life being sacrificed at the altar of the oligarch corporate gods, with big name people like a RFK Jr. to distract the masses from what it is actually doing. Like Trump, in that way, has always been brilliant at marketing to that particular cohort that believes that he is the boss on The Apprentice, right? So going along with that, Robert Kennedy Jr., he has the name credibility of his family, but he has a 22 caliber mine and a 357 Magnum World, and we can't allow people like that to be in charge of something like HSS if we care about our future and our children's futures.
Yeah, we will see what happens throughout this week as the returns come in, because
Mm,
again, these do have very broad implications. No matter who people pick as president, there are
mm,
definitely implications. There's a cabinet to pick. There's
mm,
potentially Supreme Court justices that have
mm,
to be picked as well. That sort of
mm,
thing. So that's something that we will look to see what happens throughout this week. Thinking about it, what's at stake in this election? We've touched on a lot of things here in this
mm, mm,
conversation, but especially for uh, Black folks,
mm,
what's at stake here in terms of what could happen tomorrow? Because I think about former President Obama's comments that
mm,
he had made, and in looking at the kind of Cliff Notes version that Brookings have done,
mm,
it's like, oh well, Black men are blinded by their gender to see the value of Harris as president. Black men do
mm,
not understand the impact of another Trump presidency on democracy, crime, family policies, the economy, and healthcare access, and that Trump does
mm,
not respect Black men and will harm Black communities. Was
mm.
Obama wrong in those comments? And again, what do you see here for Black people in this election? I know you're very passionate about all of this on social.
Well, I think this election is the most consequential election for Black America in my lifetime. I mean, the reality of the situation is simple. They want to enact Project 2025. Project 2025 basically rolls back whatever societal and legal process progress we've had since 1964, right? So it puts us in a situation where Project 2025 takes away the guardrails to turn Black Americans back into second-class citizens. They're already talking about removing birthright citizenship, right? So you can see from Brown versus Board of Education, from all of the things that have allowed us from the civil rights era on now to make some of the progresses we have. This is their way of correcting that, right? So that's one thing. Another thing on the economic level, 57% of Black people are working class and below, right? I believe only 3% of Black households make over $200,000 a year, right? So we have an administration that, for some of its faults and work or warts, has done a very good job of investing into the future infrastructure of this country, which creates the kind of jobs that Black Americans can, within that 57%, can rise up from being working class to middle class, thinking about these sorts of paths. Trump doesn't, and the Republicans don't have any sort of plan like that for us, right? What they're talking about is instituting tariffs, which the Black consumer will end up having to assume the brunt of, which is basically an additional sales tax. All of the things in which they're talking about doing benefits a 1% of a 1%. It does not benefit the lion's share of Black Americans. So what we have to ask ourselves specifically as Black men, we have two main responsibilities: take care of our families and take care of our communities. If there is an existential threat being posed to our community by people who held a Nazi rally last weekend, then yeah, Obama is right. Do I think he could have said it in a different way? Yes, because I believe he didn't necessarily grow up in some of the neighborhoods, the Chicago, the New Yorks, the Birmingham, Alabama, whatever. So there's certain people who feel like he doesn't have the same cultural cachet. But I think us as Black men, we have to be honest. About 8.4 million Black men voted in the 2020 election. 47% of the Black vote in 2020 was Black men, so 53% was Black women. But by and large, most Black men don't vote, right? So this is a conversation where in the barbershops and in neighborhoods, the brothers who actually don't vote end up having a little bit more sway than the brothers who do vote, because the apathy, the insouciant attitude towards this indifference towards the system, that the system doesn't help. But if you look at the first 2 years of the Biden administration, blue collar jobs are rising at an exponential rate in this country, right? So HVAC and plumbing and welders and all these jobs that are good, high paying jobs that they need workers for. The Biden administration invested over $1 trillion from different sources, helping create those sorts of jobs that have an applicable effect on the future of Black men, right? Because all of us can't work in tech. All of us can't work, white collar jobs and end up in a situation, where we end up with a ton of student loan debt. So there's opportunities that the Democrats, being a very pro-union administration, have gone after, offering housing credits and small business startup credits and all these sorts of things on top of $17 billion and counting towards HBCUs just in 4 years, right? So there is a ton of evidence that the Democratic Party is better for working class and middle class Black Americans, right? The last 4 years have been an anomaly because of the inflation situation due to the pandemic. But by and large, since 1989, the Democratic administrations have created about 52.5 million jobs, while the Republican administrations have created about 1.2. That is not a typo, right?
Not even
So
close.
when you Right. So when you think about that sort of information, and like I said, only 3% of us make over 200 grand, right? So by and large, we're moving our way up in the situation. So if we do not think about these things about what's going to help our long-term economic future, what's going to help our long-term future as a community, because another thing, Supreme Court, like you mentioned earlier, when a Chevron decision came down this summer, that means that federal agencies are no longer able to regulate their offices the way they used to be able to. So technically, that means that Black Americans don't have civil rights anymore. And the reason why I say that is because we both know the litigious nature of the far right, right? Somebody's going to put a case on the federal docket. It's going to end up working its way to the Supreme Court in a couple of years, and it'll be something like a job post that says whites only, right? So once you do that, And the court is able to strike down and say, well, because of Chevron, federal agencies aren't really allowed to influence, so on and so forth. And if the Trump administration is in power, they're already talking about getting rid of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. So if a company starts saying they only want to hire white people, they can legally have a pathway to doing that. Those are the kind of stakes that we're looking at. The legal framework exists. It's still a couple years away per se. So something as simple as, the welders that we're talking about, the blue collar workers, say if they pay a white employee $75 an hour, but they have a rule that they only pay the black employees $50 an hour. Who's going to do the enforcement and the federal crackdown on these agencies if Project 2025 happens? And these are tangible things that will affect the black community. So no, I think this is the most important election of our lifetime. I think beyond the election tomorrow, like for example, my friends and I were working on starting a mentorship program for 18 to 34-year-old young black males. Um, we're trying to figure out ways to build a stronger sense of community amongst black men, young black women, et cetera, across class lines, because this problem doesn't go away on election day. And I think that the black community, we need to continue to work and leverage these social media tools so we can stay in contact with each other to be able to fight back against the rise of the far right, because they won't stop until they get their way.
Well, definitely it is going to be a very, very interesting week, to say the least. I think that so many of what you just said here is definitely something for people to really think about as they decide the direction that they want this country to go
Mm-hmm.
as we move forward here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the remaining time that we have got left in this, and again, I really appreciate this conversation. There are undecided folks out
Mm-hmm.
there, some of whom are probably watching this program.
Mm-hmm.
In a maybe a quick, maybe 1 to 2 minute little pitch, if you
Mm-hmm.
will,
Mm-hmm.
um, what should people think about? There are some people who will be like, well, Kamala Harris, she, because of the circumstances in this, she was not in the primary,
Mm-hmm.
in this go round, that, oh, the Democrats have staged a coup, essentially, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to those people, and what would you say just in general to anybody who's kind of sort of undecided in this election here?
Well, if someone's still undecided at this point, right, to be perfectly honest, I would want to ask them truly why, right? You see one guy who today, God knows what other crazy things are going to come out of his mouth. Last week, he was talking about having a firing squad attack Liz Cheney. He was talking about sicking the military on Congressman Adam Schiff, right? Those things alone should be disqualifying for it to not, for you not to be quote unquote undecided. If it's a situation where you just can't see yourself voting for a Democrat, you got to again ask yourself why. The underlying economic data supports that Democrats are better on the stock market. They're better for wages. They're better for job creation, company growth, et cetera, right? So if it's the culture war issue, right? If you have an issue with voting for Democrats because something, let's use abortion. You're a pro-life person, right? Okay, cool. So if pro-life is the thing that is most important to you, how could you vote for a party in the Republicans that let over 700,000 people die during a pandemic, that held back PPE equipment? And Jared Kushner said the states are going to have to battle it out for equipment because this is our stuff, right? Those are the level of people that you will be letting back in the White House. There is 40 or so former cabinet members of former President Trump who refused to endorse him, right? I'm not saying Kamala is perfect. I'm not saying that there are not legitimate gripes about everything from her, from Middle Eastern policy, experience, all those things I completely understand. But we're at an inflection point in history, right? And if the country can survive 4 years of Kamala Harris, I don't know if the country can survive 4 weeks of Donald Trump, right? And if that's something that has not been made abundantly clear to you at this point, I'm not sure if those people are undecided as much as they're being contrary and trolling, right? Because this isn't Barack Obama versus John McCain. This isn't John Kerry versus George W. Bush. This is one guy who's a demagogue versus another person who you might feel have an annoying laugh, right? Maybe you don't like that she can't produce her McDonald's transcripts, whatever, right? But one guy is literally talking about destroying government as we know it, and another one might raise taxes on the 1% of people who make over $400,000 a year. What are we really doing here? We need to think about the future of this country, the future for young people, and truthfully, the future for 30, 40, 50-year olds, right? Because if Social Security goes belly up and healthcare and human services doesn't exist anymore, you're gonna have tens of millions of people who won't be able to get any sort of services and treatment because we made the wrong electoral choice in 2024. And I just believe we should be better than that.
WayneTronics, let's hope that the public listens to this conversation and comes away with some real gems of wisdom that you have just provided on this program. WayneTronics, political commentator, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
2 years ago on Fit to Speak from the Archives, I reviewed The Game Is Up, and given tomorrow's election, it is certainly worth revisiting. We'll have that video as well as a link to Melissa Joan Peltier's film in the YouTube description below. And yours truly was recently interviewed on the Media Minutes podcast with host Angel Toole. It was quite a lot of fun, and you can listen to her podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, we'll have that link in the YouTube description below. Thank you so much for watching. Listen, there's going to be a lot more where that came from, so you better stay tuned to catch it all. In the meantime, don't forget to follow us on all of our social media accounts for more information, including all of the bonus content that you'll see from today's show. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell on our YouTube channel so that you do not miss any of our episodes. And do subscribe to our Substack page, csemedia.substack.com, so that you can support all of the work that we do here. And until next time, I'm Eugene Obah. Vote. And remember, we will not be silenced.